Peace, Ohnahji fam, and welcome to the Ohnahji U session on Spatial.io 101. This is an introductory session going over the Metaverse platform. My name is Six Sense. I'm a proud community member that discovered Spatial.io while browsing our Discord. I've been playing with the platform for a few weeks and wanted to come back and kind of share some of the tips and tricks that I've learned. We've got a lot to go over today. This actually stemmed from a live class that we did earlier this week. I wanted to make sure that we had a recorded version for folks that couldn't attend, but we actually had a lot of candid back and forth conversation in the class. So if anything sparks your interest, if you have questions, if something comes up, you got any ideas, definitely drop it in our Discord so we can continue the conversation. This is meant to be one of several classes, and how we move forward is dictated by the topics that the community raises. So definitely chime in if anything raises your interest. So today we're going to talk about a few things. Primarily, we're going to cover what Spatial.io is and how can we use it. We're going to look at it from the standpoint of NFT projects and educators. We're also going to look into building a space from templates by actually jumping into the platform and using one of their pre-built spaces. We'll then talk a little bit about building DIY spaces using your own assets or pulling in third-party assets. Again, after that, if you have any questions, I encourage you to post them to the Discord so we can continue the conversation. So what is Spatial.io and why is it intriguing? It's a tool that allows people to create virtual spaces and host other people. You can have voice conversations, and it has a bunch of really cool built-in features that we'll actually take a look at in a little bit. Now, the concept of a tool that lets you design your space isn't really unique, but this platform does a couple of things really, really well that I wanted to highlight. The first is that it has a super low barrier to entry. So the technology in Spatial is simple enough for users that are not really comfortable with Web3 or computing, but it's also in-depth enough for folks like you and I that have a bit of a head start on this Web3 XR experience that we're talking about. I find that a lot of platforms will either cater to beginners or they'll cater to experts but not meet in the middle, and Spatial does a good job of balancing the experience for both sides of the coin. It's a multi-platform software, and so it works for Mac, PC, mobile devices, and VR devices. And something that I think is really key when it comes down to adoption is that people can browse a space that you make without making an account. So if you have this cool thing that you created, you can send a link to somebody and they don't have to go through a long sign-up process to check out your work. That's really, really key for engagement, especially for cold engagement where you're trying to get people to support a project. Now, in terms of engagement, one of the other things I love about Spatial is that they're very active with their community. Specifically, they're actively engaged with smaller communities of artists, NFT projects, creatives, and I like seeing companies that, again, do that balance of talking to the larger brands, but also spend some time with folks that are just developing their brand. It shows that they actually have a scene in mind and they have future plans in mind, and they're not just catering to a quick flip, which we see in Web3 so much. The last thing I'll highlight, their development and their support is very active. We actually had a bug that I saw on the platform over the weekend, and I shot a message to support on a Sunday. Got a response on Sunday, which was very, very surprising. You always see them rolling out new features and versions, and I think that's really key. When you see a platform engaged, updating frequently across all platforms, it's a really good sign that they're invested in the future. So let's move forward and talk a little bit about some use cases. The first one that comes to mind is pretty obvious, and that's folks that are involved with NFT projects. So Spatial has always been really key for folks in the NFT space. It allows you to display your NFTs as you see in some of these examples. I personally was drawn to mint more Ohnahjis after seeing them in our official gallery. If you haven't checked the gallery out, I encourage you to do so. But just looking at these things laid out, especially when I put on the Oculus and saw them in a VR space and turned my head around and saw these giant canvases, it triggered that inner collector in me. It triggered that same emotion I get when I see a pair of Jordans in a different colorway that I don't own. I saw a couple of traits that I wanted, and that made me go and mint more Ohnahji NFTs. And so I think that's something that's important to think about if you're starting your own project, or if you're just trying to do anything that requires community support. If you can trigger those emotional responses like the one that I just described, you have a better chance at getting somebody to execute on a call to action or to do something that you want them to do. And with that in mind, it's important to mention that your gallery can also serve as a direct marketplace for your NFTs. So you can connect your wallet. I connected my MetaMask wallet as well as my Phantom wallet for Solana NFTs. And when you do that, you can import the NFTs that you own and display them with plaques that link to their OpenSea links or their OpenSea pages. And so if you look at this second slide in the upper right corner, I've got 2 NFTs in this gallery, and to the lower right, you'll see plaques. If you're in this space, you can click on these plaques, you can view these plaques, and it has the NFT information as well as a link to the purchase. So you can flat out have folks have that moment of inspiration trigger when they're in your gallery, and then you can immediately point them to the point of purchase. And by minimizing those steps that it takes between feeling inclined to support something and minting it, you improve your chances of someone actually converting and supporting your project. I think it's really important to make it as easy as possible to find things in this community and in this space. Now, when we're talking about NFT creators especially, and anybody really, any creative that's trying to point somebody somewhere, one of the other cool things that's available is portals. And portals offer really unique onboarding experiences. They're essentially a link system. If you look in the lower right corner, this third or this fourth image here, this orb looking thing, this 360 orb, is a portal. And so if somebody is in my space and they're taking a look around and they get to this portal, they can actually walk to it and click on it, and it'll open up a link to whatever we determine they should go to. So in this example, I've got a link that goes to our Discord. And so if someone's in my gallery and they see all these cool Ohnahji NFTs, and then they're done browsing the gallery and kind of want to learn more or want to know what the next step is, this orb gives them a call to action. This portal gives them a call to action. And it's essentially saying, hey, you can travel here to learn more about what we're doing. Again, when it comes down to minimizing those clicks in order to get somebody from point A to point B, little tools like this are really, really useful for engagement. You can also include QR codes in your space. So if somebody's browsing on their computer and they see a QR code, they can grab their phone, scan the screen, and that'll point them to a Discord or whatever link you want. You can also link folks to other spaces. And I'm actually really excited about that idea from a community standpoint, because let's say I have a gallery, let's say there's the official Ohnahji gallery, obviously, let's say Boss has a gallery. I can have portals that go to each of their respective rooms. And so now we're sharing our communities with each other. If somebody learns about me through my music work and they're finished browsing my space, maybe they might be inclined to go to Boss's space just because I have his portal in my spatial room. And so it's something to think about. I think about the idea of having a real campus environment, especially as we grow bigger as a community. And it would be cool to have a university hub where there's portals that will take you to the respective classrooms or resources for students. There's a lot of ways to think about portals. So if you have any cool suggestions, if this triggers an idea, definitely let us know in the Discord, drop a comment below. Let's continue the conversation. Finally, spaces like this are great for community games and brainstorming. If you look in the lower left, there's a scavenger hunt that I highlighted in the Ohnahji official spatial room. But anytime you can get people in a room together and just toss ideas, you get different results versus something that's text-based. And so I like this idea of there being a central hub that folks can pop in and out of. The team at Spatial also confirms that in the future, if you host a room and then someone pops into your room, you'll get a notification on your devices. So if we have an official Ohnahji gallery and all of a sudden someone's in there, if you have a couple of minutes, you can pop in there too and see how they're doing. It's a great tool for getting us all on the same page across different time zones, and just something to nudge us to more one-on-one style contact. So there's a lot to unwrap around NFTs. Obviously, this project was made, or this tool was made with Web3 in mind, so it's pretty easy to see where it lines up with NFT projects. If you have any ideas, definitely let us know. Moving on, we'll talk a little bit about another topic. I think Spatial.io is really useful from an educator's standpoint. If the pandemic showed us anything, it's that underserved communities need to be ready to teach each other online when the time comes. I saw so many public schools that struggled because they didn't have alternative resources for keeping kids engaged online. And so when I see platforms that offer opportunities to think about teaching differently, I get really excited. They cut the arts programs from my school when I was younger. And so anytime we can supplement education, I try to look into it and try to support it as much as I can. So education can take a lot of forms in platforms like Spatial. The more obvious ones are illustrated in the example at the bottom. This is the Archeo HQ. Archeo is a 3D modeling software. They're pretty dope. But they created this huge representation of their HQ, which includes an auditorium. And in this auditorium, you have 4 speaker seats on the stage. You could project, slides in the background. You could have your speakers on the stage, just going through a lecture. And you can even go as far as to sit in these seats. It's a really, really cool concept, but I do think that we sometimes think too literal about education spaces. I know for a fact that a lot of kids learn differently. I learn differently. I really like being visually engaged as a student or engaged via audio and sound as a student. So I don't necessarily think we all need to be diving to make giant auditorium spaces to teach each other. I like examples that I'm seeing from platforms like the Bit Museum where they have a lobby, and in their lobby, they talk about the basics of what they do. And then they have different chambers for their exhibits. When you go to these chambers, there's portals that take you into the actual space the exhibit describes. So they have this ancient Egypt exhibit. You go to the portal, and then rather than having somebody tell you about it or reading something about it, you're actually transported into what their ancient Egypt model looks like. And so you can walk around a pyramid, you can look at these statues, and you can read and learn more about the ancient Egyptian time that they're referring to. And for me, that's a way more exciting way to learn as a student, especially, again, when you put on a VR headset and can engage and walk around these types of spaces. It does a different thing when it comes to your focus. It's really easy to get distracted if you're in front of a computer or you're learning from a phone, but everything kind of laser dials in when you have a VR headset on. And so I think there's a lot of room to really engage people when it comes down to education by blocking out the noise and putting them in the middle of the experience. As they continue to remove a lot of our history from education and a lot of storytelling from education, tools like this become all the more important. I think about the idea of something like walking our children through Black Wall Street and having an actual representation of what Tulsa looked like, or something from the science perspective and walking our kids through a digestive system where the spatial room is a model of something like the stomach. There's a lot of opportunities for these metaverse spaces to supplement education, especially for the learning disabled. And I'd really, really love to hear where the community stands here and any ideas that you might have. So we can talk on the macro level for ages, but I think the next thing we should do is just open up the platform itself. We'll talk a little bit about building a space out of Spatial's templates, and then we'll discuss a little bit about building a space from scratch. Okay, so let's move over to Spatial.io itself. And I'm using Google Chrome. Haven't had the best results out of Safari, so if you're having any issues, switch over to Chrome if you're a Mac user. We'll start things off by talking about like the basic navigation and by building our own space. So when you first open it up, you'll be opened up to this explore page. It'll show you some of the best spaces available. You can also see your spaces that you've worked on or visited. I'm just going to click new space to create a new one, and we're going to work through some of the templates that they have available. So these are available to everybody directly in the platform. They're free of charge. They also support what's called collectibles, which are basically NFTs that you can mint. And when you mint them, you then have access to use these for your own personal space. You can also build your own templates. There's also third-party spaces that are available for purchase. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But for now, let's work with one of the built-in templates. Let's just load up the aisle gallery, for example, and we'll talk a little bit about the basics of putting a scene together. So first things first, my character is my Ready Player Me avatar. If you're a Ready Player Me user, your avatar will work here. That's really, really fun, especially as they roll out these new outfits. Navigation follows the standard ASDW, first person shooter walking style. You can also click anywhere, and you can rotate the camera with Q and E. So since my wallet is connected, I'm going to display one of my NFTs. Let's click on upload art, and we'll just display one of my recent ones right here. Bam. And so this is an NFT that's in my MetaMask wallet. When you add it to a frame, it's locked. I'm going to go ahead and unlock it so we can talk a little bit about some of the cool features. So when it comes down to displaying your NFTs, especially as a marketplace, one of the important things you can utilize is that plaque system that I talked about. I just click down here to show the plaque. And now if you walk up here, you can see a link with all the ownership information for this NFT. If I click on that link, it'll open up in OpenSea where we can review minting and reminting options. Super useful if you want to show people something that's available to sell, or if you just want to show your proof of ownership. But that is something that's optional, so you can turn that off if you choose to by hiding the plaque. You can also go for a more modern look by choosing to show or hide this frame. You can duplicate, and you can move this thing around in the space if you choose to. I'm just going to lock that up to avoid accidentally moving it. Now, you can actually upload a bunch of your NFTs at once. There's a feature where you can select a bunch and it'll automatically put them in various frames across your gallery. I haven't had the best results with it, if I'm being honest. I prefer to do this manually. It avoids duplicates and it avoids weird gaps, but that feature is there if it's something you want to try. If you have the pro options available, you can actually token gate a space. We'll talk about that in a bit, where basically you limit the space to people who own a specific token. You can also import art from just standard integrations like your Google Drive. So I have Google Drive connected, and it has all of my images, JPEGs, and all that good stuff. I wish it had an image preview. That would be useful, but as long as you know the naming of your files, you should be good. And you can use that and load up any image to a frame just like you would an NFT. Obviously, it won't have a link to the OpenSea page, but you will have an info pane where you can fill in whatever details you want to fill in. That's great for just decorating your space in general. If you want to just throw a big image onto a wall instead of going through full texturing, that's an option of doing that too. So the next thing we'll talk about is importing a 3D object. This is something that got me involved in Spatial in the first place. I created a room where I wanted to have like a nightclub that played my music, and I decorated the room with a bunch of 3D objects. So 3D objects come in various forms. GLB files play very, very friendly with Spatial.io, but they have a variety of file formats. Check out their support page for that information. But let's just click on this lunar model here, which is something I got off of Adobe Images, or Adobe Stock, I should say. And we've got this little lunar model. We can now move around the space. I can double click it, scale it up, rotate it. You can reposition it using these tools too, or by hand. You can place it on a pedestal. Just nice and fun. You can do all the duplication that we talked about. And you can even add a little bit of information here. Something I like to do, if you don't just want to put like standard artist information on a piece, you can use these little info tags as like words of affirmations. So the universe only has one you. So I'll save that. And now when you're walking around this space, that kind of hovers next to the piece. It's cool for lore and for storytelling. And again, when you think about the ability to customize the 3D object, you can really go a long way with the storytelling side of things with that feature. So I like to highlight it. Another thing you can add to improve storytelling and interactability is sticky notes. If you're accessing the platform on your computer, you have to type in your sticky notes. But what's cool about accessing the platform from like VR, you can actually do a couple things. You can change the background color. There's some more customization, but you can also hand draw your notes. And I thought that was really cool in the last gallery I worked in, just being able to like handwrite in a couple of musings. I think it's a cool, like more personal feature when it comes down to saying something. I do like the idea of opening up like a tag board, for example. So if you have a community room, you put up a sticky note and then everybody can write their little pieces to it. But you can scale these notes, you can rotate them and move them around the space accordingly, just like any other object in Spatial. And once you're done, you'll lock it up just like anything else. Pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. Now let's talk a little bit about portals. As I mentioned before, portals are Spatial's cool way of getting you to go to a link or a different space. Adding them is very easy. I'm just going to click Add Portal here. And then you can choose to link to a different space. Just select that there, something from the Explore page, for example. Or you can create a link. I'm just going to link to our Discord, and I'm going to title this Campus, and I'll show you why. So I hit create, and what's cool, a lot of URLs like Discord will actually pull in like the icon imagery from whatever the platform is. So Discord pulled in the Ohnahji U logo, and if you get close to it, you get this little auto prompt that says travel to campus. I try to name it with that in mind so it feels more interactive. But by walking over, you can just click it, and then you can go to that space. When you're editing, if you need to go back and fix mistakes, you just have to click this, click no, and then you can go and edit this further. You can scale it up. These are really, really fun to decorate your scenes with. They look really cool. They're like 3D rotating architecture. It's kind of like a mesh. And it's just a really, really fun way of sending somebody to a link versus just a copy paste link to their DMs. Something else we'll talk about is screen sharing. So if you go down here to share a screen, you can go ahead and share a screen, a window, or whatever. This is super useful for presentations. But I also think it's really useful for folks that are creative. So if you're a musician, if you're a coder, if you're somebody doing like ongoing stuff on a screen, if you're a visual artist, a 3D artist, and you want to provide your supporters just like an over-the-shoulder look as to what you're doing, you can share your screen. And now your daily work is just streamed throughout your gallery. And how neat is that? You can scale it up and place it in the 3D space just like anything else. All of these objects, once you import them, pretty much act the same. And when you're done with your screen share, you can just click stop sharing. Some of the 3D spaces that I'm trying to customize now have theaters on the roof or theater rooms just for this. So if folks want to share something, they can do that. Also on the horizon from the Spatial.io team, they've confirmed that YouTube support is coming out soon. So you'll be able to share a YouTube screen or stream. And that includes a live stream from YouTube. So again, if you have something that you're streaming on YouTube already, you can also mirror it to a spatial space and have an audience, have a place where they can gather and watch it. It's such a cool idea. So my first focus on making my own spatial gallery was to display an EP that I was working on. I wanted to put my music out there. And I learned very quickly that you can't just upload an MP3 to Spatial and have it play, which was kind of surprising if I'm being honest. My assumption is it's a copyright fear thing. They probably don't want us just uploading songs randomly, but I hope it is a feature they roll out. In the meantime, the workaround is to use a video file. You can upload an MP4 video, and then whatever music that you want to play, just make that the music for the video. In my example, I actually made a full music video for the project. But if you're just interested in the audio itself and you don't need the video portion of things, you can have an all black video screen, or you can make a really, really small video, scale it down and hide it somewhere in your gallery, and then have it automatically play. I should actually talk about that really quickly. Let's not place this in frames. But in order to have this automatically play, you have to save your scene with it automatically playing in a saved state. So in order to do that, you want to play, and then you want to no matter how we feel about it. I'm going to mute this. You want to engage this repeat option, this little loop at the lower right. When you do that, you want to exit your scene, and then anytime anybody else pops into the scene, this video will automatically start playing and will automatically loop. So it's a good way of having background music, ambient music. And it's actually really flexible because Spatial supports something called audio fall off. So you can set your space up so that if you walk away from this video, you won't hear it anymore. The volume will lower and disappear. Or you can have it displayed throughout the entire room if you wanted something that's going to be your ambient sound for the room the entire time. So it's a bit flexible. That's a bit of a workaround. But I do hope that down the line, we can just easily upload an MP3 or upload a WAV file. They're a lot smaller than video. It's kind of annoying to have to add this big asset just to play sounds. And so before we open up a custom space, the last thing I'll talk about really quickly are host tools, which are a pro feature, but they're important, especially for the NFT communities and folks that are doing brainstorming sessions. You have a lot of control as to what people can do in your space. So obviously you can lock your pieces to prevent them from being moved, But if you want to prevent folks from adding content, from downloading your content, changing your space around, things like that, you can completely restrict things to view only, or you can kind of choose what people can and cannot do. There's options to mute and moderate participants. You can set people as hosts so you can get some additional help while you're doing a teaching session, for example. That's super key. Like I mentioned before, you can set token gate access. This is a newer feature, but it's clutch for our community. So by clicking here, you can enable this access and then confirm the details of your project. And now, in order for somebody to get into this room, their wallet has to be connected and they have to own one of the NFTs from that project. Really, really dope stuff. I can't wait to see how folks start to utilize this. And then there's some just general housekeeping things like reverting to your last save state, or bringing all the users in your space to you in case you want to talk to them. Host tools are very, very powerful. Definitely wanted to touch on those really quickly. So that's kind of the basic navigation around the space. There's a lot of additional features in and under the hood. I encourage you to play around, but just using that general stuff should get you enough to get a gallery up. And with the ability to take one of these templates that exist already and add to it, you can add your images over a wall. You can bring in these 3D objects. You have a lot of flexibility to make a space your own, even if you're not going through the whole DIY route that we're going to talk about next. So the next thing we'll do is create a custom space. And as I mentioned, you can grab collectibles that exist from here or from third parties. Or you can use third-party resources that are free, and that's kind of what I did when creating my first custom space. I wanted to make a nightclub, and so I used something that I found from Sketchfab as my environment and kind of built the scene from there. Now, I will say, depending on the third-party resource, you may have a lot less flexibility. There are file and size limits when it comes down to the models that you'll use that work. And so I'll link to some of those as well, just so you have an idea of what you have to play with and what you should be looking for when finding a 3D object to use for these spaces. So let's just go to upload custom space. And it'll load up this world and you'll get this little box that says drag a 3D model. And so in finding 3D models, the website that I use is called Sketchfab. And there's tons of different resources available. This is not the only one. What I wanted to do when I first started my project was to create a nightclub. And so I'm going to select downloadable to limit it to downloadable figures. And then I just searched nightclub at the time. And I looked for something that had low polygons that fit within the minimum requirements that are suggested from Spatial. And so this oldie was just exactly what I was looking for. If you've been to my gallery, it should look pretty much like this. I just added some additional NFTs to it. But we've got a nice little preview in Sketchfab so we can look around. I like this figure, and so I downloaded the entire GLB file as a zip from this platform. It was free of charge. And then I just uploaded that zip into this drag and drop screen. It took a little bit of time, so I did that ahead of time. And now it's available for us to grab at any point in the future from my contacts menu. That's this file you see here called nightclub zip. So I'm going to click on that. It's processing our custom environment. And boom, we're placed right dead center in this world. Now, we're lucky this scene lined up pretty well. It actually looks really good. But if for whatever reason this thing didn't line up properly, you can adjust how it looks. And a lot of times when you bring in these third-party scenes, they will not line up properly. You have to do some tweaking. We just got pretty lucky with this one. So if you do need to tweak something after you bring it in, go to Environment, and then you can go to Edit Environment Position. It'll bring up this little screen here, and this is where you would adjust things accordingly. So if I needed to raise or lower the floor, for example, you want the floor to kind of line up with those little squares. You can use the Y and adjust. You could rotate things. You could scale this thing up or down if you needed to, so on and so forth. I'm just going to reset all this because we had a pretty decent model from the start. And then once things are sitting the way you want, you're good to go. We can walk around this space. These stairs have colliders built into them so you can actually walk. But I will say, with regards to stairs, it's very, very often unnecessary or less helpful to have stairs depending on how they're laid out, especially if people are going to access your space from VR. So in the VR version of Spatial, you can't walk around. You can only do the teleport feature. to go from space to space. And so when you're looking from this first person perspective, let's say you're like down here and you're trying to get up to this platform up here, you have to click on this surface and it gets really, really hard. So something that I usually recommend for folks is to use ramps instead of stairs. It's a little easier to get up and down places if someone can rely on a ramp versus a staircase in VR. So we'll talk about two more things really quickly. The first being spawn points. If I go to environment, I can add an entrance point, or a spawn point as it's called in gaming. And you can double click this and use the same tools for any other 3D object. Bring that down and put that on the floor, and wherever you lay a spawn point is pretty important because this is where folks are going to load up in your room when they first get there. So kind of think intentionally about this space. You don't want to have people load up into a corner where they're stuck somewhere. So give this some thought. And now the last thing we'll talk about really quickly is skyboxes. And this is better illustrated when you have a world that's outside. So let me back up. I'm going to open up a space that is nowhere near done, nowhere near started really, but it's a good way to illustrate a point. So this is a really, really, really large map that I've created just to kind of do some playing around with the idea of a campus. If you go to the edge, this background has not been pulled from anything in Spatial. This is a 360 skybox that I loaded in. And skyboxes are made out of 360 photos. You can grab them from Google Maps, which is really helpful, and convert them. And essentially they create the environment around your space. So if you're trying to do something in outer space or in a forest or in a beach, this is the way you make the sky plane and all of the surrounding panoramic planes happen. And so to do that, you can just go to add a new object. I'm going to load up one of these custom skyboxes. This is a good one. It doesn't look as cute, but it's a good one to illustrate the point. So it loads up as a little 3D orb or 3D object. I'm going to click on it and then hit set custom environment, set it as a skybox. And now that has completely changed. This is a low res image, so it doesn't look as great, but there's some really amazing high quality textures that you can use to give a really, really convincing look to the outside environment that you're working out of. So we went through a lot. This kind of gives you the ins and outs of working in Spatial.io. We discussed some use cases, making a space out of a template, making a space out of some third-party DIY resources. Hopefully this triggered some thoughts and got the gears going a little bit. If you have any questions, please, 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 I encourage you to join us in the Discord. We'd love to continue this conversation and know how to aim our next classes. Again, my name is Sixth Sense. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Peace.